Hi, I'm Lorelai. My parents had one rule when my sister's family moved in: don't make waves. So I gave up my bedroom, moved into a basement, and stayed quiet until Thanksgiving. That night, over turkey and red wine, they told me I could take the storage room or leave the house I'd helped save. My sister raised her glass, smirking like it was a toast. You understand, right? I walked out. The next morning, Dad called 56 times. But it wasn't guilt. It was fear. Turns out, the truth I buried in silence, it was more powerful than they ever imagined. Now I'm asking you, have you ever kept quiet so long that speaking up felt like setting fire to your own family? Let's begin. I woke up earlier than usual, the kind of early where it still felt like night. The house was quiet, too quiet for the week of Thanksgiving, the kind of quiet that wraps around your ribs and settles behind your eyes. I padded down the hallway in thick socks, the old floorboards underfoot groaning in places they always had. Muscle memory guided me straight to the kitchen. There it was, my mug, white ceramic, chipped on the handle. Home, written in faded blue script. I grabbed it like I always did, poured myself coffee, and stood at the window over the sink. Fog clung low across the grass. The sun hadn't quite decided whether to show up yet. This house was always home, even after I moved into a one-bedroom apartment 2 towns over. I still brought the good wine to family dinners, still knew where the sharp scissors were kept, still felt responsible for helping with the holiday chaos. This week was no different. I was here to prep the house for Thanksgiving, clean the guest room, stock the fridge, polish Mom's good silverware she only used once a year. So when the moving truck rolled into the driveway, my breath caught mid-sip. A big, clunky truck. Too big to be just visiting. I watched through the thin curtain as the back of the truck opened. Out came box after box. Kitchen, master bedroom, toys. Then came Maris, my older sister, still in her workout leggings like she was moving between yoga and brunch. Her husband, Brenner, directed 2 teenage boys I barely recognized. One wore earbuds, the other carried a PS5 under his arm. Dad came outside in his fleece vest, waving like he'd just won a prize. Mom was already hugging Maris tightly, chattering about pot roast. Brenner smiled that smile that never quite reached his eyes. I stayed by the window, holding my mug, holding my breath. My name wasn't called. At dinner prep, Mom tossed salad while Dad poured wine. I was peeling carrots, trying to pretend the earlier truck scene hadn't happened. They'll stay for a bit, Dad said casually, like he was announcing rain in the forecast. Just until they get things sorted. I looked up. They? Them. He nodded toward the living room, where the boys were arguing about internet. Speed. Maris laughed, swirling her glass. You don't mind, right, Lori? She always called me Lori when she needed something. I was still standing with the peeler in one hand, carrot in the other, and suddenly the kitchen felt too small. My mouth opened, then shut. The air tightened. Mom changed the subject, asking about the cranberry sauce I'd brought. That night, I told myself I was overreacting. Families help each other. That's what we do. Besides, it was temporary, right? The next morning, I went upstairs and froze. The guest room I'd been staying in was now a storage space. Stacked boxes from floor to ceiling, the toys box resting on the bedspread I'd just smoothed out the day before. My suitcase was outside in the hall, beside a laundry basket filled with my folded sweaters and books. My toothbrush lay on top of my Kindle, like someone had scooped everything up and dumped it neatly. Mom's voice came from behind me. We'll figure something out, honey. Maybe the basement for now. Then Maris appeared, holding a latte. You're good with the small space, right? Her tone was just right, sweet enough to sting, like she'd rehearsed it. I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? argue in the hallway with a toothbrush in my hand. Later, I stood in the kitchen again, staring at the coffee mug in her hand. My mug, the one with the chipped handle. Maris sipped casually. "It's just a mug." I didn't reply. My voice felt like it had gone somewhere I couldn't reach. The kitchen was loud with laughter from the living room, the kind of laughter that made you wonder what the joke was and whether you were part of it or just the punchline. I scrubbed the cutting board, wiped down the counters, put away the groceries I'd bought. No one asked where I was staying that night. Invisibility has a certain weight. It doesn't scream, it settles on your shoulders, familiar like an old coat you thought you'd thrown away years ago. People talk about feeling at home like it's a given. But I stood there, sponge in hand, realizing something that should have scared me more than it did. Sometimes people move in long before their boxes arrive. But I didn't know then how quickly they'd take over everything, even my place at the table. Thanksgiving arrived with a golden haze in the sky and the smell of roasted turkey wrapping around the walls like a familiar song. I'd always loved this day, the rhythm of it, the shared rituals, the feeling that even if everything else in the world felt unpredictable, this one meal would be exactly as it had been every year before. I started setting the table by 10. White linen cloth, Mom's floral china, napkins folded diagonally, just like she liked. I moved with purpose, the kind that keeps you from thinking too hard. 6 plates across the long table, then 3 on each end. I added glasses, the heavy kind from the cabinet above the sink, and tiny butter knives shaped like leaves. I reached into the drawer to grab the name cards. I'd made them by hand years ago, calligraphy on cream cardstock, laminated with tape. I used to make new ones every year, but Dad liked tradition, so we just reused the old ones. Everyone had one, everyone but me. I searched twice. Under the tray, inside the napkin box. I even checked the junk drawer. Maris's card was placed at the head of the table, right where Dad usually sat. Her boys flanked her, each with space to stretch out, even room for their phones beside the plates. There was a folding chair tucked near the kitchen entryway, next to the door that squeaked every time someone passed through. A plate already sat in front of it. No name card, just a paper napkin, not even one of the cloth ones I'd ironed earlier. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding a spoon in one hand like I wasn't sure what it was for anymore. Dad came in from the garage, brushing off his hands. "Maris wanted to make sure the kids had room," he said gently, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. "You know how it is." Before I could answer, Maris's voice floated in from the living room. "You don't mind, right? You've always been easy." Easy, like a folding chair. I smiled and nodded, because that's what I do. I went back to the kitchen and began carving oranges for the salad, the knife moving rhythmically, a quiet defiance. Dinner started just after 5. Mom lit the candles. Brenner popped open a second bottle of wine. I helped carry in the sweet potatoes and green bean casserole, carefully sidestepping the boys, who were already half watching something on their phones. The table buzzed with conversation, neighbors dropping in, Aunt Cheryl laughing too loud, Brenner explaining the housing market to no one in particular. I barely noticed when Dad tapped the edge of his glass with a spoon. "I just want to say," he began, his voice warm but rehearsed, "how grateful we are to have everyone together. And a quick little announcement." I felt it before he said it, that tiny tilt in the room, like the walls knew before I did. "Maris and Brenner will be staying with us for a while," Dad continued. "You know, just until they get things sorted. Family helps family." There were nods, some awkward, some forced. "And since the guest room's full," he added, not looking at me, "Lori, we thought you could take the storage room downstairs, just for now." Silence wrapped the table like a wet blanket. Forks hovered in midair. Maris reached for her wine, swirled it gently. "You understand, right?" Every eye that wasn't avoiding mine was pretending not to see me at all. "Sure," I said, the word catching slightly in my throat. I stared at the cranberry sauce, trying to remember if I'd made it or bought it. Everything started to blur. Brenner passed the rolls. The boys asked for Wi-Fi. Mom stood to refill glasses and avoided meeting my gaze. For the rest of the meal, I smiled. I smiled as Dad made a joke about kids these days. I smiled when Mom complimented Maris on her resilience. I smiled even when Maris leaned in as I stood to clear my plate. "Don't take it personally," she said, her voice syrupy. "It's just temporary." That smile of hers lingered, not warm, not mocking. Just there. Like she'd already decided her place in this house was permanent, and mine was subject to removal. I walked back into the kitchen and stood at the sink. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter until they turned pale. Outside, the moon had begun to rise, casting a ghostly reflection of my face in the window. I looked calm, too calm, but my chest was tightening, my thoughts too loud. Dad came in behind me, grabbing a dish towel. "You'll understand when you have kids of your own," he said, not unkindly. I turned slightly. I thought understanding was supposed to go both ways. He didn't respond, just dried his hands and walked out. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked to the hallway and picked up my bag. I placed it on the guest bed, or what used to be mine, and began packing, neatly, slowly, one item at a time. I didn't cry, I didn't curse, I didn't leave, but I packed in silence, because something had shifted, and I needed to be ready. I didn't leave right away. I wanted to see how far they'd go. After dinner, the house felt louder than usual. Laughter echoed from the living room, bouncing off the high ceilings. Someone turned up the TV, football highlights or maybe a holiday special, and for a second, I stood at the top of the basement stairs, holding my suitcase, listening. Then I went down. The steps creaked beneath me. I kept my hand on the railing, more out of habit than need. The basement light flickered once when I turned it on, then steadied into a dull yellow glow. It smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old concrete, like childhood, but colder. The room wasn't meant for anyone to live in. A single bed frame leaned against the wall, stripped bare except for a thin foam mattress. Boxes were stacked in uneven piles, Christmas decor, old files, tax 2008, and one just marked Dad's junk. An ironing board stood upright in the corner like it had been waiting to judge me. I placed my suitcase beside the bed and sat down, careful not to let the mattress shift too loudly. The air felt damp. I rubbed my arms, more out of discomfort than cold. A moment later, Mom's voice floated down from the top of the stairs. "It's just for a while, honey. We'll figure things out soon." I didn't answer at first, just stared at the exposed pipe above me. "Okay," I finally said, keeping my voice steady. "Thanks, Mom." She didn't come down. I unpacked slowly. Just the essentials: sweater, toothbrush, the small alarm clock I'd brought from my apartment. I set it on an overturned crate beside the bed, then reached into my bag for the home mug. It was chipped on the rim, the way I remembered it, but it didn't belong upstairs anymore. I'd just set it down when the washing machine kicked on. A low hum started, then a steady, wet roar as water filled the drum. I flinched. The machine sat on the other side of a thin wall, but the sound vibrated straight through the concrete floor, up my spine. Each spin cycle thudded like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. I sat on the bed, legs tucked under me, staring at the wall as it pulsed gently with every turn. It felt like being caught in something I never signed up for. Upstairs, voices rose again. Laughter, then clinking glasses. I could hear Maris telling someone about the new kitchen, how we all chipped in, how it was such a family effort. I froze. The kitchen. That was me. I'd saved for 6 months. Got the counters redone, the cabinets repainted. I'd coordinated it while my parents were out visiting Aunt Rhonda in Florida. It was my surprise, my thank you. No one said anything, not even Dad. I lay down facing the wall, my arms wrapped around a pillow that smelled faintly of dryer sheets and something older. I whispered to myself, maybe they just forgot. It was almost midnight when I finally fell asleep. The washer had stopped by then, but its echo still lingered in my head like a ticking clock. The next morning, a soft knock on the door woke me. I sat up, blinking. Maris peeked in, her hair perfectly brushed, makeup already on. "Hey," she said in that sing-songy voice she used when trying to sound kind. "You okay down here? The kids were loud last night. Hope we didn't keep you up." I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, she added, "By the way, would you mind helping me with some tax forms? Brenner's a mess with numbers, and you've always been good at that stuff." The same tone, the same smile, a little sugar on top of salt. "Sure," I said. "Bring them down." She beamed. "Knew I could count on you." I worked on the forms sitting cross-legged on the bed while Maris brought coffee, black, not how I liked it, and sat beside me on an old crate, scrolling through her phone. "These government things are so boring, right?" she said without looking up. I didn't answer. My fingers moved across the papers quickly, organized, precise. When I handed the folder back, she looked surprised. "Wow, that was fast. You always were the smart one." I smiled politely. "Thanks." Then she was gone. The rest of the day passed like honey poured in winter, slow, sticky, thick. I helped Mom with dishes, made space for the boys' video games on the bookshelf, and folded towels Brenner left in the dryer. No one asked if I needed anything. No one said, "Thank you." That evening, I returned to the basement. I changed into a sweatshirt, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened. The washer kicked on again. This time, I didn't flinch. I let it roll through me like a drum I'd learned to ignore. Above me, I heard them laugh. Not the casual kind, but full-on, belly-deep laughter. The kind we used to share playing board games or making fun of bad Christmas movies. I closed my eyes. It didn't sound like family anymore. By the next morning, I no longer felt like a guest in my parents' house. I felt like an intruder in someone else's. Upstairs, the sounds had shifted. They weren't just louder, they were permanent. The boys had taken over the den with their video game consoles and snack wrappers, their voices bouncing off every wall without concern for who else was in the house. I came up from the basement with a basket of folded laundry, and that's when I saw it. Maris, in yoga pants and a cardigan, moving the living room furniture. She had Dad's old recliner shoved against the far wall, nearly behind the bookcase. In its place sat a shiny, modern leather armchair I'd never seen before, right in the center like it belonged there. "Thought this layout felt more open," she said casually as I stood frozen at the doorway. I looked at Mom, who was wiping down the counter, pretending not to notice. "That was Dad's chair," I said quietly. "He said it didn't support his back anymore," Maris replied with a light laugh. "Plus, this one matches the rest of our stuff. Don't you think?" Before I could answer, one of the boys ran by, nearly knocking the laundry basket from my hands. "Watch it, Jonah," I said, holding the basket steady. "Sorry, Aunt Lori," he muttered, already halfway up the stairs. Chips crunched under my feet as I stepped around the corner. I reached for the thermostat on instinct. It was set to 75. Brenner walked in from the garage, wiping his hands with a dish towel. "I turned it up this morning. This house runs cold," he said, like he'd owned it for years. I didn't answer. Instead, I went back down to the basement, set the laundry down, and opened the notebook I'd started 2 days ago. I began to write. Everything. The furniture, the thermostat, the laughter that never included me. By Sunday night, the house looked like it belonged to someone else. The walls had new family photos, smiling shots of Maris, Brenner, and the boys. Some from last Christmas, some I didn't even remember being there for. At dinner, while we sat around the table, Mom, Dad, the boys glued to their phones, Maris passing a bowl of mashed potatoes, she reached down beside her chair and pulled out a framed photo. "I had this printed today," she said brightly, turning the frame toward my parents. "Thought it might look nice in the hallway." It was a group shot, all of them, except me. Mom let out a soft gasp. Dad smiled awkwardly. No one said anything. I stared at the picture for a beat too long, then said, "It's beautiful." Maris nodded, pleased. "Oh, we didn't have a good one of you, Lori. Next time." I excused myself after dessert and went out to the back porch. The night air bit through my sweater, but I stayed anyway. I needed space to think. Later, when I came inside, I passed the kitchen and paused. Their voices were low, but the words were sharp. "You know she'll always find a reason. To feel left out," Maris was saying. "Don't feed into it." "I just want peace, Maris," Dad replied, sounding tired. So tired. "Then let me handle it," she said. I stood there, hand hovering over the light switch, afraid to breathe. That's when I knew. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being edited out. I went downstairs and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't just list the changes. I started mapping the patterns. What she said, when Dad looked away, how Mom avoided my eyes. They said I was too sensitive, but sensitivity was how I survived their kind of love, the kind that forgets you exist unless you're useful. I closed the notebook, placed it back under the bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The silence was thick, except for the low hum of the washer again. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to make coffee. My mug, the chipped one that said "Home," was gone. In its place sat a new one. "World's Best Aunt." I hadn't chosen it. The morning sun crept in through the kitchen blinds, slicing the room into quiet strips of gold and shadow. I stood by the cupboard, fingers grazing over familiar grooves, reaching for the one thing that still felt mine. But the shelf where I always kept it was empty. Gone. In its place sat a glossy white mug, the words "World's Best Aunt" splashed across it in bold blue script. Still warm. I picked it up, turning it slowly in my hand. There were lip smudges on the rim that weren't mine. "They didn't even bother to wash it first," I murmured, almost to the mug itself. Behind me, Maris floated in, hair tied up, fresh-faced, smiling like she hadn't just swallowed the whole house in her sleep. "Oh, that one?" she said, gesturing casually to the mug. "The kids wanted you to have it. Cute, right?" Her tone was light, practiced, sweet on the surface, sour underneath. I held the mug a second longer before nodding. "It's adorable." She was already at the fridge, pulling out oat milk. "You always liked things simple." There it was again, that slow, slicing condescension, hidden under compliments that weren't. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug I hadn't chosen, watching her move through my mother's kitchen like it was built for her. She knew where every bowl was, every drawer, and no one corrected her. Later that afternoon, Dad and I sat in the den. He was reading the paper, or pretending to. I was folding towels, something I hadn't been asked to do, but did anyway. "I talked to Brenner about the house," he said without looking up. "He offered to help with the mortgage." I stopped folding. "What do you mean, help?" He shifted in his seat. "Well, it just makes sense. He's here, and taxes might move some things under his name." I stared at him. "The house?" Dad kept his eyes on the paper. "It's not a big deal, Lori. It's just paperwork." I set the towel down slowly. "You mean the house I helped refinance when Mom needed surgery?" His fingers twitched at the page. "You'll still have your room. Don't worry." "My storage room, you mean?" I asked. More statement than question. He didn't answer. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror in the basement, the one propped against old paint cans and a space heater that never worked right. I stared at my own reflection, tired eyes, soft shoulders, the outline of someone fading. I rehearsed every word I wanted to say. I imagined marching upstairs, laying it all bare, names on deeds, credit cards I'd maxed out to save them, memories being scrubbed clean like I was never there. I pictured their faces when I reminded them who actually paid for that new kitchen, who stayed when things were hard, who remembered birthdays no one else did. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I heard laughter, Dad's deep chuckle, Maris's high, rehearsed giggle, the sound of shared joy, without me in it. Stood there in the half-dark, hand resting on the stair rail, the speech slipping from my grip like steam from a kettle. Let them laugh, I thought. I turned and went back down. There was a time when I thought silence was surrender, but now I realized it could also be strategy. My mother always said, "Don't poke a hornet's nest if you're not ready to run." But I wasn't running anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my notebook, and wrote down every word. Not for them. For me. Because no one remembers the silent daughter. Unless she starts writing things down. They called it helping. I called it disappearing with a smile. That night, lying under a thin blanket, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I'd let them finish their game first. Because the best way to expose a liar is to let them talk too long. 2 weeks passed. Snow fell in thin, quiet sheets outside the narrow basement window. The house above me buzzed with Christmas energy, boxes of garlands being pulled from closets, cinnamon-scented candles lit in every room, and the high-pitched clamor of Maris's boys arguing over ornaments. But down here, in this half-lit corner I now called mine, all was still. I sat hunched over my old laptop, the one with the dent near the hinge and the battery that only worked when plugged in. The screen glowed faintly, casting a soft rectangle of light onto the desk, my face, the surrounding dust. I wasn't watching Christmas movies or scrolling sales. I was tallying history. My name, my numbers. Each row on the spreadsheet was dated and detailed. Mortgage payments, home repairs, interest rates, doctor's bills, especially the big one from 2018 when Mom had her hip replacement. I'd been the one who maxed out 2 credit cards, consolidated loans, dipped into my retirement savings to keep us afloat. I'd called the insurance company every day for weeks to fight the denial. I still remembered the name of the rep who finally approved the partial claim, Cynthia. Sweet voice, sounded young. Line by line, I'd recorded it all. There, in front of me, was the truth. My truth. Years of sacrifice, of showing up, of covering for their messes without ever asking for thanks. I titled the document Ledger Lorelei Final.doc and hit save. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was sinking. I felt like I was anchoring myself. Above me, muffled laughter drifted through the ceiling vent. I didn't bother to move until I caught snippets of conversation, clearer than usual, maybe because the hallway door had been left open. Maris: "We'll make it official after New Year's. It'll look better for taxes." Dad: "You're sure Lori won't be upset?" Maris laughed. That same polished laugh she used at dinner parties and PTA meetings. "She doesn't care. She never does." There was a pause, a clink of a spoon on ceramic, the quiet sigh of someone being convinced to stop worrying. I stared at my screen, the spreadsheet now dormant. She thinks I don't care. She thinks I don't notice. I reached forward and closed the laptop. In the reflection on the dark screen, my face hovered, familiar but changed, still, sharp. That evening, while everyone gathered around the fire upstairs, Maris leading the boys through some staged version of Jingle Bells, I slipped quietly into the kitchen. I needed tea, warmth, anything. There, on the counter, was an envelope addressed to the family. No one had opened it, probably dismissed it as holiday junk. I opened it. It was a thank you letter from the local hospital for a generous donation. Thank you for your continued support. Your $5,000 donation on behalf of the Whitakers will help expand our pediatric care wing. I froze. At the bottom, there was a signature, Maris Whitaker, and a line, check number no 247. I knew that number. I'd written that check last month for home expenses. Maris had asked me to cover the heating bill, said she was waiting on a delayed work reimbursement. My check, her name, my money, her glory. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, slid it into my notebook, right behind a printout of the mortgage refinance agreement from 4 years ago, signed by me. Only me. Later that night, back downstairs, I sat under the dim desk lamp again. The air was cold enough to make me wrap the blanket tight around my shoulders, but I wasn't shivering from temperature. I opened my email and created a new folder labeled Insurance. One by one, I attached files, the spreadsheet, scans of receipts, copies of checks, photos of documents I'd quietly taken from Dad's office over the last week. Then I created an encrypted folder and moved everything in. Once uploaded, I deleted the originals from my desktop, not out of fear, out of strategy. I leaned back in the chair. The basement was quiet now, save for the faint humming of the laundry machine starting its rinse cycle. For years, I thought being silent was being strong, that letting things go was mature, that putting family first meant swallowing your pride, your pain, your name on every form that never got acknowledged. But silence, I realized, isn't noble when someone else is using it to build their version of you, one that suits them, keeps them in the spotlight, makes them look generous with your sacrifice. I used to be the shadow that made their light seem brighter. Now I was the record they didn't know was being kept. No confrontation, no yelling, just facts. Let them talk. Let them praise each other, erase me in polite conversations, use my help, and rewrite the credits. I wasn't waiting for them to thank me anymore. I was watching, documenting, preparing, and when the time was right, I'd have the truth. With dates, with proof, with receipts. When I turned off the lamp, the room went dark. But for the first time, I could see everything clearly. And clarity, I learned, is the most dangerous thing a quiet woman can have. The house felt quieter after the holidays, but not in a peaceful way. More like the quiet you feel in a room that used to be yours, only now your name's been scraped off the door. The tree was still up, though the lights blinked off rhythm, and Maris's color-coordinated decorations clung to the mantel like polite strangers. They looked expensive, sterile, nothing like the mismatched ornaments Mom and I used to laugh over, the ones with dried glitter and peeling paint that meant something. Walking into the kitchen that morning, I paused. The framed photo of Mom and me, taken the week after her surgery, when I had been helping her shower and change her bandages, was gone. In its place stood a glossy shot of Maris's boys in matching sweaters, all teeth and forced grins. My mother's smile had once filled that wall. Now she'd been reduced to a shadow behind her daughter's brand. Dad sat at the table sipping coffee. His gaze followed the steam more than the photo. I didn't say a word. Instead, I walked back downstairs. Beneath the basement stairs, where the air was colder and the wood creaked. If you stepped wrong, there was a box I hadn't touched in years. Black, heavy, fireproof. I dragged it out, wiped off the dust with the sleeve of my sweater, and flipped the latches open. Inside, paper. Old envelopes, yellowing edges, files with curled corners. Receipts, statements, letters, check copies. Things you don't look at unless you're desperate or determined. There it was, bank statements with my name, loan agreements from the year Dad lost his pension, my signature on every page, check stubs with scribbled notes, Mom's insulin refill, roof patch, winter storm, plumber, mainline fix. A notarized letter from First Federal, signed by a bank manager who had since retired, confirming I was the sole guarantor on the home refinance that saved this place. The same house where I now slept, next to a box of dusty tax files, while my sister's dog had a room with a window. I looked at the documents and smiled. Everything they conveniently forgot was here. That evening, I came up for dinner. First time in weeks. The table was set. Maris had used her new plates, beige, square, trendy. Brenner sat at the head like it meant something, going on about renovation plans and open-concept kitchens. Dad nodded occasionally. Maris chimed in between bites, spinning her latest vision. Halfway through Brenner's ramble about tearing out that outdated roof, I set my fork down gently. You might want to check with the person who paid for the roof before you start replacing it. Silence. The air thinned. Dad blinked. Maris looked up, lips parted in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You mean Dad? She asked, tone light. I met her gaze. No, I mean me. Then I stood, smoothed my sweater, and left the table. No. Raised voice. No dramatics. But it landed. Later, I heard them whispering upstairs. Doors opened, closed. I didn't care to make out the words. I had said enough. The next morning, Maris appeared at the basement doorway, arms folded like she was modeling for a self-help book cover. Dad says you've been acting weird. Are you okay? I didn't look up from my laptop. Perfectly. She stepped closer. You know, if you feel left out, you could just say so. This is your home, too. I looked her square in the face. I did say so. You just didn't listen. Her jaw twitched, but she said nothing more. That night, my Wi-Fi mysteriously went out. My phone wouldn't connect. I restarted the router 3 times. No luck. Then I noticed my car keys were missing from the hook by the door. Checked the laundry, the counters, the usual spots. Nothing. It wasn't subtle, but it was smart, passive, petty, classic. They weren't just playing house anymore, they were playing defense. I sat at my desk that night, bundled in a hoodie, typing in the dark. I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be, shouting inside my head, repeating arguments I never said aloud. No, I was focused now. Cold, clear. I opened a new document and labeled it Timeline. Then I began to write dates, events, lies spoken, and silence used as cement. They thought I'd finally broken, but I was just done pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. The next morning, just after sunrise, I put on my coat, tucked the fireproof box under my arm, and walked to the driveway where snow had dusted the windshield of my car. I brushed it off with one hand, unlocked the trunk, and slid the box in next to a small duffel. I closed it gently. If they wanted a war, I'd bring the receipts. But I didn't know. They'd already planned their next move. Sunday came cold and gray, the kind of morning where the snow sticks to the windows and time moves slower. I was folding laundry in the basement when Dad called down the stairs. "Lori, we're having a quick family talk in the dining room." His voice sounded too casual, too rehearsed. By the time I walked upstairs, the table was already set, like it was Thanksgiving again. Same chairs, same scent of cinnamon. But nothing felt warm. Maris was seated beside Dad, one hand draped over his arm like she was anchoring him. Brenner leaned back in his chair with that half-smirk he wore when he thought he'd already won something. I sat opposite them, no greetings, no small talk. Dad cleared his throat. We've decided it's time to make things official. Brenner and Maris will co-own the house. It's best for everyone. Maris nodded sympathetically. It's not personal, Lori. You'll still have a place here, always. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my tote and placed a single folder on the table. Quietly, no flair. I slid it toward Dad. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the top page. A scanned copy of the original refinance agreement from 2011, bearing his signature next to mine. Then the next page, a list of wire transfers tied to my account. Then a notarized letter from the bank manager affirming I had carried the mortgage for the past 12 years. "You're right," I said, my voice even. "It's not personal, it's legal." Dad's face went pale. Maris didn't blink, but her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "I've been paying this house off since the year Mom got sick. You'd know that, Dad, if you'd ever opened the statements you signed." I turned my gaze to Maris. "And as for you, the next time you donate money under my name, at least spell it right." She flinched. That broke the mask. Maris gave a short, breathy laugh, the kind people use when they're stalling. "You wouldn't go through with this," she said, trying to smile. "This is family, Lori." I leaned back in my chair. "I already did. The attorney got everything yesterday. The county will receive the transfer packet first thing Monday morning." Dad sat stiff, staring at the folder like it had teeth. "Lori, sweetheart, let's not do this. Let's talk this through." "No, Dad," I said, calm and sure. "Let's finally call it what it is. You let her take my place, and I let you." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. No one moved. Then Maris broke. She slammed her napkin on the table. "You are unbelievable," she hissed. "You're bitter because you're alone, and now you want to ruin everything? We were trying to help you, and this is how you repay us?" Her voice cracked through the room like glass shattering. "You lived in the basement because you wanted to. You stayed quiet because you couldn't handle confrontation, and now you pull this out like some kind of power play? Grow up, Lori." She looked to Dad for backup, but he didn't speak. "You're just sad," she added, voice trembling now. "You've always been the sad one." That was when Dad slammed his palm on the table. "Enough!" Everyone froze. He looked at me for the first time in months, not glanced, not skirted, but really looked. His eyes were red at the rims, his jaw clenched. "I should have asked. I should have checked the books. I didn't know." I nodded once. That was all he would get. From the basement, I heard the soft hum of the washer starting another cycle. The same machine that had kept me company for months. The same sound I heard the night I moved downstairs, not because I wanted to, but because there was no other space left for me. Only now, it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like rhythm, like order returning. I stood up slowly, collected my folder, and walked toward the hallway. No one followed. Even Maris didn't say another word. Not even the washing machine could drown out that silence. The next morning, Dad called, 56 times. I woke to the soft gray of early February, slipping through the thin curtains of my new apartment. The air smelled like fresh paint and something close to peace. My phone buzzed once, then stopped. I turned it over, already guessing what I'd see. 56 missed calls, all from the same number. The voicemail icon blinked like a pulse. I didn't press play, not yet. Instead, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood slowly, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The heat hadn't fully warmed the space yet, but I didn't mind. There was no one else here to complain, no one telling me what music was too sad, or who was allergic to cinnamon candles. I reached for the mug I took when I left, the one they'd chosen for me without asking. White ceramic, glossy, still reading, "World's Best Aunt." I poured my coffee, let it steam under my nose. And for once, the mug didn't feel like a joke. It felt like something I'd earned, on my terms. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one I found secondhand but cleaned like it was gold. No holiday centerpieces, No curated matching chairs, just mine. It was the quietest morning I'd had in years. The phone buzzed again. Voicemail. This time I played the first message. Dad's voice was shaky. "Lori, please, call me back. Maris, she's gone too far. There's trouble." Click. Next message. "It's me again. Your mom's crying. She didn't know, okay? She didn't know. I should have..." Another one. "Lori, you were right." I closed my eyes, not from relief, not from victory, just from stillness. Because being right was never the goal. Being heard was. Being counted. And that part had already happened. By noon, I'd listened to 10 messages, skipped another dozen. They all blurred together, regret, confusion, half explanations sent far too late. The apartment stayed quiet. At around 2, I got in my car. Not because I planned to go back, but because I wanted to prove to myself I didn't need to. The roads were mostly dry, patches of slush pushed to the curbs. I passed the grocery store where I used to pick up Dad's low-sodium soup, the post office where I'd once mailed the refinance forms, thinking I was saving something that mattered. I drove past the old house but didn't stop. From the corner, I could see the front porch. Dad sat out there in a thick coat, hunched, staring at nothing. His phone in his hand. Maris's car wasn't in the driveway. I slowed down, just enough to take it in. Then I whispered, almost like a prayer, "You'll figure it out." And I drove on. No dramatic music, no confrontation, just distance, clean and quiet. It was the most powerful silence I'd ever carried. At a red light a few blocks away, I looked to my right and saw a laundromat, neon sign flickering. Inside, rows of machines spinning slowly, the hum bleeding through the windows even, with them closed. That sound. Months ago, it had been the soundtrack to my invisibility. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Steady, rhythmic, alive. Let it all spin. I'm done folding what's broken. Back at my apartment, I took a long shower, changed into soft clothes, and opened my windows just enough to let in the smell of cold air. The kind that wakes you up gently. Later, I sat with my laptop and typed a short email. Not to my father, not to my sister, but to myself. Subject line: "You did it." There was nothing in the body of the message, just those 3 words. I hit send, just to see it arrive in my inbox. A reminder. That night, as I sat curled up with a blanket and a book I'd meant to read for years, the phone buzzed once more. Dad again. I watched the screen glow, then fade. This time, I didn't reach for it. I didn't walk away to punish them. I walked away so I could finally stop asking for a seat at a table I built myself. When Dad called again, I let it ring. For the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned.